The wind clawed through the narrow streets of a town that time seemed to have forgotten, rattling the old shutters and whispering through the cracks in the wooden houses. No one noticed her leaving in the mornings, her footsteps soft on the worn gravel, slipping past eyes that looked without seeing. She was small, pale, with eyes that held a strange, hollow glint, as if she carried secrets too heavy for her age. Her family kept mostly to themselves, a shadow behind closed doors, their movements quiet, deliberate, almost ritualistic. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward the house at the end of the lane, where rumor and unease clung to the peeling paint like stubborn mold. Whispers of their lineage, tangled and dark, drifted through conversations but never fully formed into words. She vanished from school one crisp morning, leaving only a faint echo of footsteps in the dirt. The townspeople murmured, exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared confront the family directly. Over the weeks, glimpses of her in the woods emerged, silent, careful, disappearing as soon as she was noticed. The air around her seemed to carry a chill, a subtle warning that something unnatural was lurking beneath her quiet demeanor. No one knew that beneath her ordinary exterior, a life-altering secret had taken root, growing in silence, shielded by shadows and fear. A life that would soon emerge, unannounced and unimaginable, shaking the delicate veil of normalcy the town had so carefully maintained. In the heart of America lies a town that seems untouched by the rush of modern life, a place where the air is heavy with the scent of pine and the streets are lined with houses that lean with age, as though the very structures themselves carry the weight of decades of secrets. The town is small, so small that everyone knows everyone else, yet beneath the surface of polite greetings and nods lies a tension, an unspoken understanding that some truths are better left undisturbed. The roads wind unevenly, as if they were carved without design, leading to houses tucked into shadows or disappearing into dense woods that border the town on all sides. It is in this secluded setting, where the hum of everyday life is punctuated only by the creak of an old gate or the distant bark of a dog, that the story begins. The isolation is not just physical, it extends into the psyche of the inhabitants, who have grown accustomed to a life where nothing is truly private yet everything is carefully hidden. There is a rhythm to this town, one dictated by generations who have lived and died in the same place, their lives entwined in ways that outsiders could never fully understand. Each face on the street tells a story of survival, of whispered rumors passed from one neighbor to another, stories that are rarely confirmed but always believed. The town has a reputation, though it is rarely spoken aloud, for harboring families whose histories are tangled in ways that outsiders might find unsettling. Children grow up learning the unspoken rules, understanding early that curiosity can be dangerous, that some doors are best left unopened. The town's geography only reinforces this sense of secrecy. Narrow lanes twist unpredictably, and dense forests seem to press in from every side, creating natural barriers that keep the world at bay and protect the town's insular way of life. Seasonal shifts bring changes that the residents anticipate quietly, the heavy, suffocating heat of summer that forces people indoors, the crisp chill of autumn that carries the smell of fallen leaves and decaying wood, and winters so harsh that the town seems to shrink under layers of snow, forcing families to huddle close and look out only from behind frost-covered windows. Within this setting, the stage is perfectly set for a story that thrives on hidden truths, where appearances can deceive and every shadow might conceal a secret that the town is desperate to keep buried. The people of the town move through their routines with a careful vigilance, always aware of the past that lingers in every corner, aware that beneath the surface of normalcy, there are stories waiting to emerge, stories that could unravel everything the town has worked so hard to conceal. In this small, secluded town, there lived a young girl who seemed to exist on the periphery of life, as though she belonged more to the shadows than to the sunlit streets where children played and neighbors exchanged greetings. She was quiet, almost unnervingly so, her presence noticed only when she moved, her steps deliberate and careful, as if she were navigating a world that did not fully welcome her. Her features were delicate but carried a strange intensity, a mixture of curiosity and wariness that made even the most observant townspeople hesitate to approach. She lived with a family that had always kept to themselves, a household that seemed frozen in time, where the outside world was observed but rarely engaged with. The family's routines were rigid and unyielding, every movement choreographed with a precision that bordered on obsession, giving the impression that the girl had been raised within invisible walls that constrained her every thought and action. The girl's isolation was compounded by the town's subtle but persistent curiosity. People watched her from a distance, speculating about her habits, her moods, and the quiet intensity of her gaze, but no one ever reached out. She seemed almost designed to repel attention, moving through spaces as though she were untouchable, yet leaving behind an inexplicable imprint on those who crossed her path. Her home was a reflection of her life, old, creaking, and full of corners where light rarely reached, a place where laughter was scarce and conversations were measured, deliberate, and often clipped. Within these walls, she learned early to observe more than she spoke, to sense the currents of tension and unease that ran through her family and the town alike. Despite her withdrawn nature, there was an intelligence and awareness that set her apart, a sharpness of mind that allowed her to notice details others overlooked, to connect patterns in behaviors and actions that remained invisible to casual observers. Her solitude was not merely a consequence of circumstance, it was cultivated, nurtured by a family that demanded compliance, secrecy, and discretion above all else. At school, she was present but rarely engaged, a shadow in the back row, absorbing lessons with quiet intensity but participating only when compelled. Friends were scarce, fleeting, and often confused by the girl who seemed simultaneously fragile and unnervingly perceptive. Yet beneath the surface of her quiet exterior, there was a turbulence that no one could see, a simmering sense of awareness that the world around her was filled with rules she neither fully understood nor could challenge. Her mind became a sanctuary where thoughts and fears intermingled, where she imagined a life outside the rigid structures of her family and town. But that life remained distant, a fragile dream that existed only in fleeting moments of longing, never fully realized, leaving her to navigate the careful balance between visibility and invisibility, obedience and curiosity, in a world that watched but never truly saw her. Even in a town where everyone knew everyone else, whispers of the girl's unusual family lineage drifted through conversations like smoke, impossible to pin down yet impossible to ignore. The murmurs started subtly, passed quietly from one neighbor to another, often in the fleeting moments between chores or during the slow, drowsy evenings on creaking porches. No one spoke of it openly, yet the stories carried a weight that made even the most skeptical pause, a sense that there were truths buried deep within her family's past that were better left unexplored. People spoke in fragments, careful to couch speculation in disclaimers, "I heard," or "they say," as though acknowledging the gossip out loud gave it power, or perhaps protection. The girl herself seemed almost impervious to these murmurs, moving through her days with the same quiet precision, but there was a strange tension that lingered around her home. Neighbors noticed subtle signs, the curtains drawn tightly even on bright days, the distant hum of voices inside when no one appeared to be home, the way she and her family emerged only for necessary errands, never lingering in the sunlight or the scrutiny of others. It was as if the house itself were aware of the attention, responding with an eerie stillness that made passers-by uneasy. Children, who were usually fearless and curious, gave her wide berth, sensing something unspoken in the way she carried herself, a presence that seemed both fragile and unsettling. Rumors of her family's lineage had roots that stretched back generations, whispered accounts of strange marriages, of kinship tangled in ways that outsiders found difficult to comprehend. Some claimed the bloodline was cursed, others that it was unusually insular, producing patterns of behavior and traits that were unsettling in their familiarity. The more curious attempted to piece together fragments of local records, church documents, and old photographs, hoping to uncover something tangible, but the information was scarce, inconsistent, and carefully obscured. It became easier, and perhaps safer, to accept the stories as half-truths, shadows of reality that existed more in imagination than in fact, yet carried the weight of inevitability. Among the adults, the whispers were a mixture of fear, fascination, and quiet judgment. The family's odd habits were interpreted as confirmation of the rumors, their withdrawn nature seen as proof of secrets too dark for ordinary life. The girl moved within this atmosphere, absorbing the energy without fully understanding it, a silent witness to the way others attempted to categorize her family, to place them within a framework of suspicion and caution. Every glance from a neighbor, every hushed comment, layered onto the tension that already clung to her household. Even as she learned to navigate the world outside her front door, the invisible web of gossip and speculation followed her, shaping perceptions, constraining her interactions, and reinforcing the sense that her life was part of a narrative that had begun long before she had even been born, one that she could neither fully control nor escape. The day she vanished from school began like any other, the sky overcast and the wind carrying the faint scent of damp earth through the narrow streets of the town. Teachers and students alike went about their routines, oblivious to the quiet tension that had been building around her for months. She had always been a figure who moved through the school with careful discretion, never drawing attention, never inviting conversation, yet somehow impossible to ignore. Her absence that morning was subtle at first, a missing silhouette in the hallway, a desk empty where it had always been, but by midday the realization began to ripple through the staff and students. Teachers called her name, glancing down corridors and into classrooms, expecting to find her lurking somewhere, tucked into a corner with her head bowed over a book or scribbling in a notebook. But she was nowhere to be found. As hours passed, the missing girl became the subject of anxious whispers among her peers. Students speculated in hushed tones, some fearing the worst, others suggesting explanations that were outlandish but clung to for comfort, that she had run away, that she was sick, that she had been taken somewhere unknown. The school administration began contacting her family, calling numbers that rang unanswered, leaving messages that went unreturned. Neighbors and friends tried to gather information, hoping for some clue as to her whereabouts, but each inquiry seemed to circle back to the same impenetrable wall of silence that had always surrounded her family. Outside the school, the town began to stir with unease. The narrow streets and familiar faces, once comforting in their predictability, now seemed charged with tension, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. People glanced at the girl's house with a new awareness, noting details they might have ignored before: the drawn curtains, the faint movement of shadows behind the windows, the absence of the usual sounds that signaled life within the walls. Rumors began to spread like wildfire, fueled by the town's fascination with secrets and its suspicion of anything that deviated from the norm. Each whispered theory was a reflection of the community's unease, a projection of the fears they could not articulate, a recognition that something was profoundly off balance. Even as the search extended into the woods and hidden corners of the town, the girl remained elusive, moving with a quiet precision that made tracking her nearly impossible. The sense of mystery grew, feeding on itself, turning simple curiosity into obsession. Neighbors began to watch the house more closely, some out of concern, others out of morbid fascination, but none could pierce the veil that her family had so carefully drawn around her. The disappearance was not violent, not dramatic, yet it carried a weight that pressed down on the town like a fog, slow, suffocating, and inescapable. With each passing hour, it became clearer that her absence was not a momentary lapse, not a fleeting adventure. It was a deliberate withdrawal into a world that no one outside her family could enter, a quiet unraveling of the ordinary, leaving behind only questions, suspicion, and the unmistakable sense that the town's fragile sense of normalcy had begun to fracture. As days passed after her disappearance from school, the girl's movements became increasingly enigmatic, drawing the attention of those who had begun to notice her odd rhythms. She ventured into the woods that bordered the town, slipping between the dense clusters of trees with a stealth that suggested familiarity and purpose. No path was clear, no trail left behind. It was as if the forest itself bent to her presence, concealing her passage and absorbing her in its shadows. Townspeople who happened to glance toward the edge of the trees would sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of her, just a flash of pale skin or the dark sweep of hair, before she vanished again into the undergrowth, leaving only a faint rustle of leaves to mark her passing. These trips, though brief and secretive, fueled speculation. Those who saw her movement spoke of it in whispers, often doubting their own eyes, uncertain if they had actually seen what they thought they had. The forest had always carried an air of unease for the townspeople, a place where the ordinary rules of life seemed suspended, where silence could be broken only by the occasional caw of a crow or the whisper of the wind through the branches. To see her there, alone and deliberate, amplified the unease tenfold. It was as though she were drawn to the hidden corners of the world, places where no one dared tread, yet she moved among them with the confidence of someone who belonged, as if the shadows themselves had claimed her. Her trips were never lengthy, and she always returned home before anyone could confront her. Yet the timing of her excursions was deliberate, calculated, often coinciding with moments when the town was distracted, when neighbors were busy with chores, when children were in school, when the streets were silent. It was clear that her presence in the forest was intentional, part of a larger rhythm that no one could yet comprehend. She was not merely hiding from sight, She was performing some act of secrecy, one that required patience, observation, and knowledge of the land that only someone intimately familiar with the wilderness could possess. Neighbors began to notice patterns, subtle signs that she had been there: bent branches, footprints barely visible in the mud, disturbances in the underbrush, but each clue seemed almost imperceptible, as if the forest itself sought to obscure her presence. Some tried to follow her, hoping to uncover the reasons behind her clandestine movements, but she always eluded them, vanishing as if swallowed by the earth itself. These glimpses, brief and tantalizing, only deepened the town's sense of mystery and suspicion. The girl's silent wanderings through the hidden places of the woods became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary life there were currents and secrets no one could fully grasp, and that sometimes, the most important stories were those that were never meant to be seen. Beneath the careful routines and quiet footsteps, a secret was growing that no one in the town suspected. The girl, already a figure of hushed curiosity and whispered speculation, carried within her a truth so hidden that even her closest acquaintances could not have imagined it. The pregnancy, entirely unknown to the outside world, unfolded in silence, shielded by her own vigilance and the protective, if unusual, behaviors of her family. She moved through the days with a careful precision, masking any signs of change with layered clothing and practiced postures, ensuring that every interaction remained ordinary, every glance casual. The small town, accustomed to its own rhythms and minor intrigues, remained oblivious, unable to detect the quiet transformation taking place behind the closed doors of her home. Within the confines of her house, the girl navigated a space both familiar and suffocating. Each room held the echoes of her family's expectations, the weight of their watchful eyes even when they were not present. She learned to measure every step, to soften her voice, to control the subtle swell of her body that might betray the secret she carried. The walls themselves seemed complicit, closing around her with a kind of oppressive intimacy that reinforced the isolation she had long endured. Even as she performed the outward motions of ordinary life, attending school when she could, answering polite inquiries, completing daily chores, she existed in a parallel world, one governed by the rhythms of a life no one else could see. Her family, though largely withdrawn from the town, played a complex role in this concealment. Their presence was both a shield and a cage, offering protection from the curiosity of outsiders while reinforcing the sense that certain truths must never be revealed. The girl internalized their expectations, understanding that secrecy was both a survival mechanism and an unspoken rule. She learned to anticipate the questions that might arise, to preempt suspicion with subtle gestures and careful planning, moving through her days with a discipline that belied her age. The weight of the secret pressed upon her not only physically but emotionally, shaping her thoughts, her fears, and the way she perceived the world. Each interaction with neighbors or peers carried the potential for discovery, each accidental glance or casual remark a possible unraveling of the carefully maintained facade. The town, blind to what was happening, continued in its routines, unaware that life as they knew it could be altered in ways they would never expect. And as the days passed, the girl carried on, navigating the delicate balance between concealment and reality, between the world that observed her and the private life that existed entirely in shadows, building toward a moment that would inevitably shatter the fragile calm that surrounded her and reveal the shocking truth that had been growing unseen. Even as she moved through her secretive days, fragments of her family's dark and twisted history seemed to linger in every corner of the house, invisible yet palpable, shaping the air she breathed and the shadows she navigated. Hidden journals and old letters, tucked away in drawers or behind loose panels in the walls, contained a record of behaviors and events that seemed almost impossible to reconcile with ordinary life. They spoke of choices made in isolation, of relationships that defied conventional understanding, and of patterns repeated across generations as if the family itself had become trapped in a cycle that could not be broken. The girl, in quiet moments when the world outside faded, discovered these writings, and each page she unfolded was a window into a lineage that carried secrets darker than she could have imagined, stories whispered but never acknowledged, a weight she felt pressing down on her very being. The journals were meticulous in detail, chronicling events and relationships with a clinical precision that contrasted sharply with the emotional chaos beneath the surface. Names, dates, and occurrences were recorded with care, yet between the lines lurked confessions, hints of transgressions, and the unease of generations attempting to reconcile their existence within the narrow confines of their isolated world. Reading them, the girl realized that the life she had been living, quiet, observant, careful, was part of a much larger narrative, one shaped by forces beyond her control, a story written long before she had entered it. Each revelation deepened her awareness of the unusual dynamics of her family, the way secrecy had been ingrained, the way patterns repeated themselves, almost ritually, over decades. The act of discovering these journals was both terrifying and illuminating. She began to understand that the isolation she had always felt was not merely a quirk of circumstance, but a deliberate structure, a way of containing the family's history and ensuring that the outside world remained unaware. The records revealed how her relatives had carefully curated appearances, maintaining an illusion of normalcy even as behaviors and decisions contradicted societal norms. The weight of that knowledge was heavy, yet there was a perverse clarity in it, a sense that by understanding the past, she could navigate the present with more awareness, though never entirely free from the shadows it cast. The presence of these journals also heightened her sense of inevitability. Patterns, once obscure, now emerged with stark clarity. Secrets were preserved, cycles repeated, and the town beyond the family's walls remained oblivious to the undercurrents that defined their lives. Each page she read reinforced the understanding that her story, her very existence, was inextricably linked to a lineage that had always operated in the margins of society, guided by rules that were unwritten yet absolute. The girl absorbed these revelations silently, knowing that the knowledge she now carried would shape every choice she made, every interaction, and every step toward a future that was already haunted by the legacy of the past. The day of the childbirth arrived quietly, as if the world itself had conspired to remain unaware. No one in the town suspected that the girl had been carrying a life within her, a secret so carefully guarded that even the most attentive neighbors had never noticed the smallest hint. She moved with her usual precision and care, hiding every telltale sign, the swelling of her body, the subtle changes in posture, the quiet exhaustion that accompanied each passing week. Within the confines of her home, the air was thick with tension and anticipation, though no one outside could sense it. The house, old and creaking with age, seemed to hold its breath along with her, walls and floors absorbing every sound, every movement, guarding the secret as fiercely as the girl herself had. Labor began in silence, unassisted, the girl navigating each moment with a mixture of fear, determination, and the strange, instinctual strength that comes from carrying a secret for so long. She had prepared as best as she could, gathering supplies, finding spaces in the house that offered some privacy, and relying on knowledge gleaned from whispered conversations, old books, and the careful observations she had made over the years. The process was grueling and isolating, every contraction a reminder of the vulnerability she had hidden from the world, every moment a test of endurance. Yet she persisted, driven by the singular knowledge that she alone must carry this event to its conclusion, that no one could intervene, and that discovery at this stage would shatter everything she had maintained. Outside, the town continued in its unknowing routines. People went about their days, unconcerned and unaware, while inside the girl's home, life itself was being brought into the world under the cover of secrecy. The isolation that had defined her existence until now became both a shield and a cage. She relied on it, but it also underscored the enormity of the task she faced alone. Every sound, the faint creak of a floorboard, the distant hum of the wind, felt amplified, a reminder that she was utterly exposed despite the careful concealment. When the child finally arrived, the moment was both miraculous and terrifying. The girl cradled the newborn in her arms, aware that this fragile life was entwined not only with her own but also with the hidden histories of a family that had long operated in the shadows. The secrecy that had protected her now extended to the child, a fragile barrier against a world that could never understand the circumstances of its arrival. Even as she held the baby close, a mixture of awe and dread coursed through her, for she knew that the revelation of this birth would eventually come, that the hidden truth she had carried so meticulously would one day intersect with the outside world, and when it did, the impact would be profound, shaking the foundations of everything she and her family had kept hidden. After the secret birth, fragments of the girl's life began to ripple through the town in ways subtle but undeniable. People noticed small inconsistencies, glimpses of her in unusual places at unusual times, a sudden absence here, a whispered rumor there. At first, these details were easily dismissed, brushed off as imagination or coincidence. Yet over time, patterns began to emerge, a careful observer realizing that something had shifted beneath the surface of the town's familiar rhythms. Conversations that once carried the easy cadence of everyday life now carried a tension, a caution, as if people sensed that a hidden narrative had begun to unfold, one that might defy their understanding of normalcy and propriety. The community, normally insulated by routine and familiarity, was beginning to perceive the first stirrings of a story it had been blind to for so long. The family's unusual behavior, always a source of quiet speculation, suddenly gained new significance. Their withdrawn nature, the precision with which they moved through life, and the protective routines they maintained now suggested that their privacy was not mere eccentricity but a shield for truths too unsettling to share. The town's collective curiosity deepened into something more persistent, almost obsessive, as neighbors began to piece together the puzzle with the fragments available to them. Bits of information gleaned from casual observations, overheard conversations, and the careful study of movement and habit slowly converged into a clearer, though still incomplete, picture of the girl's situation. At the same time, the girl herself remained a paradox of visibility and invisibility. She moved through her life with deliberate caution, aware of the growing attention yet refusing to expose the secret that had defined the last months of her existence. Every gesture, every word, every appearance in public became part of an intricate dance, a performance that maintained the delicate balance between revelation and concealment. Those who tried to intervene or investigate found themselves frustrated by her careful precision, her ability to control the smallest details and guard against intrusion. Even as the town began to sense that something extraordinary had occurred, the depth of the family's inbreeding legacy, the source of the girl's hidden life, remained unknown to most. The whispers grew more pointed, fueled by speculation and unease, yet lacked the concrete knowledge to confirm what had truly taken place. The tension between curiosity and ignorance created an atmosphere thick with suspense, as the community collectively waited for events to unfold, unaware that the next revelation would not only shock them but also force them to confront a history that had been carefully concealed for generations. The fragile calm of the town, so long maintained by routine and distance, began to crack, revealing a hidden layer of fear, fascination, and disbelief that would continue to grow as the story of the girl and her family slowly came to light, reshaping the perception of everything they had thought they knew. As the town's whispers thickened and speculation grew into a silent storm, the truth behind the child's father emerged in a way no one expected, striking at the very core of the community's assumptions and fears. It didn't happen through a dramatic confession or an accidental slip of the tongue, but through a series of small discoveries that slowly connected into a horrifying revelation. Old records, fragments of conversations, and the strange patterns within the family's history all converged into a single, undeniable conclusion. What had long been rumored but never proven now stood in stark, chilling clarity. The father of the child was not some outsider, not a mysterious stranger, but someone bound by blood to the girl in a way that defied every moral boundary the town believed it upheld. The truth threaded itself through the town's memory like a needle pulling through fabric, stitching together pieces that had once seemed separate, forming a picture they were never meant to see. The realization began with details that had always been there but had never been scrutinized: unusual closeness within the family, generations of tightly controlled marriages, and a lineage that folded in on itself rather than branching outward. When neighbors finally revisited these clues with new understanding, the truth became impossible to ignore. Eyes widened, voices faltered, and conversations abruptly ended as the implications dawned on them. The child, innocent yet unmistakably marked by its origins, became the living proof of a cycle that had persisted in secret, hidden behind closed doors and quiet routines. The weight of that revelation pressed down on the town with suffocating force, forcing even the most skeptical to confront what had taken place. For the girl, the revelation was not a moment of shock but a grim confirmation of what she had known all along. She had carried the truth within her, the knowledge shaping her silence, her fear, and the careful secrecy of her every action. The child in her arms was both a burden and a fragile light in the darkness she had inherited, a life born into a world that would struggle to understand its existence. Her awareness of the father's identity had not come from sudden discovery, it had been embedded in her life, a truth woven into the very fabric of her upbringing. Yet even with that knowledge, she had hoped, naively, desperately, that the world outside might remain unaware. But secrets of this magnitude cannot remain buried forever. The revelation spread quietly at first, then with growing momentum, transforming the town's curiosity into horror, their whispers into accusations, their uneasy glances into outright avoidance. The family, once simply considered odd or withdrawn, became the center of a narrative darker than anyone could have imagined. The girl's quiet existence, once treated with mild suspicion or pity, now stood as the focal point of a generational tragedy the town had unwittingly allowed to unfold in its midst. The truth, now exposed, altered everything, their perception of the family, of the girl, and of themselves, leaving behind a shadow that would linger long after the shock had faded.